All right, good morning, fellow SkeptiCampers. My talk is fusion power. Are we there yet? I'm going to be going over some of the history of what's happened in fusion power in the last few decades and where we're going in the next few decades. I want to recall this movie from 1985 called Back to the Future. The characters in this movie were Marty McFly and Doc Brown. They had a time machine was built into this DeLorean. And in the time machine, they could go into the past. And in the second movie, they also went into the future. They went to the futuristic year of 2015, 30 years into the future. And it's interesting to see what they thought would be the type of technology we'd have in 2015. So one of the things that we're supposed to get in 2015 is this hoverboard. I haven't noticed anyone riding around in one of these, so it's unfortunate that we never saw the hoverboard. But it reminds me of a quote from the late Yogi Berra. The future ain't what it used to be. How true. But they also saw some other technology in 2015. Doc Brown found an alternative power source for his time machine. He retrofitted it to the DeLorean. It was called Mr. Fusion. And it looks suspiciously like a coffee machine. In fact, the name is supposed to be a parody of Mr. Coffee. The movie actually used a coffee grinder as the prop for Mr. Fusion. So the year is 2015. Why don't we have Mr. Fusion running our DeLoreans? People have joked that fusion is the power of the future and always will be, because it seems like it never is progressing. We never see real fusion power. But actually, just a few years later, in 1989, a pair of distinguished scientists, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons, actually called a press conference, and they announced that they had discovered cold fusion, a way of generating power using fusion that happened at room temperature. But unfortunately, over the months that followed, it caused a big furor. The scientific community worldwide tried to duplicate what they claimed to have done, and no one was able to duplicate this. And so infamously, they landed on the cover of Time magazine. Unfortunately, no one was able to duplicate it, so it fell into the realm of junk science. This should be a warning to all scientists that really maybe it's not a good idea if you have a major discovery to call a press conference unless you're really sure of yourself, because it could be wrong, and if so, you'll be very embarrassing. Can we generate power from fusion? The answer is absolutely yes, because we have this natural fusion reactor in the sky. You might have noticed it. It's called the sun. It's been working for 4.5 billion years thereabouts. It's probably going to work for another 5 billion years or so. So it's very reliable. And this is, nature's fusion reactor. How does it work? Well, if you go back in time more than 4.5 billion years, one time it was just a cold ball of hydrogen. Gravity over time compressed that hydrogen down, and it heated up. The core eventually got to a temperature of about 10 million degrees. And when that happened, a fusion reaction started, hydrogen started being converted into helium, and it released energy, and that produced an outward force that counterbalanced the force of gravity. So it's an equilibrium. So we can use this natural fusion reactor to generate power. We just have to put up some solar panels. We can capture that power. But there's problems with this, of course. For one thing, you may have noticed also that the sun's not always there all the time, because we're living on a rotating planet, and other things too. If, for example, clouds get in the way, you're going to suffer a reduction in power. And we really do want power that can be sustained 24 hours a day. In the dead of winter, we still need power. Can we generate power using nuclear energy? Absolutely. In fact, we currently do have many nuclear power plants like this one in Pickering. Now this, however, is not fusion power. This is fission power. 15% of Canada's electrical needs are met by nuclear power like this. It's mostly in Ontario, but there's also a plant in New Brunswick. And a lot of the world's power is generated through fission power. Here's the top countries in the world that are generating power using fission. United States, France, Russia are the top three. And you can see France actually generates about 77% of its electricity using fission. So it's a very practical, popular way of generating power. So why do we need fusion? What's the difference? The difference is that In a fission reaction, you take these heavy elements, uranium-235. It's quite radioactive. You have to dig it up from the ground. You have to purify it. And then the byproducts of the reaction are highly radioactive as well. In fact, they'll stay radioactive for thousands of years. So it poses a storage problem. Whereas in fusion, you take these relatively abundant light elements, and the byproducts of the fusion reaction are also radioactive, but they only stay radioactive for tens of years. The problem of storage is much more tractable. Okay, so can we generate artificial fusion? Absolutely yes. It looks like this. It's kind of unfortunate because you really can't use this to generate power. You can use this to kill people. You can use this to destroy civilization. You can use this to cause the human race to go extinct, maybe. But you can't generate power from it, so that's kind of unfortunate. So how does it work, though? Fusion bomb, a hydrogen bomb, has within it a fission bomb. That's the only way to produce this extreme temperature and pressure that's necessary for fusion to occur. So how, though, can we create a fusion reaction, but in a controlled way so we can generate power rather than just be destructive? Well, there's different techniques. One is this magnetic confinement technique, because it turns out the main problem when you have something that's 10 million degrees, it's kind of hard to contain. There's no matter that won't turn into a gas at 10 million degrees. So we need something that's non-material, like a magnetic field to contain something that's that hot. This type of reactor is called a Tokamak fusion reactor. And in fact, they're currently building a large experimental reactor called ITER. It's located in southern France. It's a project that's undertaken by many different countries, including the EU, Japan, China, and the US. The construction started in 2013 and is expected to begin operation in 2020. So this is not going to be a reactor that generates electrical power. It is an experimental reactor. We're trying to work out the bugs, and then the next step would be to create a prototype reactor that generates power, and then go to scale and actually generate an industrial amount of power. Now, there is other ways of generating a fusion reaction. One way would be to take a small pellet of fuel, maybe only a few millimeters in diameter, and then bombard it with intense laser light that's focused down on that fuel. The laser light will confine the material, heat it up, and hopefully generate a nuclear fusion reaction. Then if we collect the heat that results from this nuclear fusion reaction, hopefully that exceeds the amount of energy we had to put in to heat the material in the first place. And this is the goal of this facility in California called the National Ignition Facility. It's got the world's largest laser, 500 terawatts, and it can produce a pulse that's only a few picoseconds long. Unfortunately, they haven't yet actually produced fusion. Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to need more practical and theoretical work in order to get this right. At least the research is ongoing. Interestingly, the set of Star Trek Into Darkness used the National Ignition Facility for its set of the Enterprise warp core. No Star Trek movie or television show shows the warp core looking like this. So this was purely a fabrication of J.J. Abrams. I guess he's not that concerned with continuity. He just wants his movies to look cool. If his movies look cool, that's all that counts, I guess. Okay, so what about other ways of generating fusion reactions? Well, maybe it's possible to have fusion without having a huge, massive complex. This high beta fusion reactor is something that Lockheed Martin has been working on. In fact, just last year they announced this project. In a few years, they hope to produce a prototype that would fit on a truck, generate 100 megawatts of power, and that would be enough to power a town of about 80,000 people. We'll see. This is essentially a skunkworks project. They're not investing huge amounts of money. This is more like a low probability, high payoff type project for Lockheed Martin. So what about the future? What if we consider time machines 30 years hence, or simply wait 30 years? Your choice. What could we expect? And as any good skeptic knows, prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. Okay, so what about these different technologies? How about Mr. Fusion? I think I can confidently say no, we're not going to have kitchen appliances which are fusion powered, because it's a big deal having something that contains something that is 10 million degrees, probably not in your household appliance range. Cold fusion, well, there hasn't been any progress on that in the last 25 years. Looks like that's a dead end. Fusion power plant, yes. I can say that likely ITER is going to be successful. That path is going to produce actual industrial scale power plants that generate real power, and it'll take less than 30 years. Compact fusion generator, well, not enough information. Maybe a few years from now we can say whether this is likely or not to happen. I just want to end with this graphic of the Doomsday Clock. You might have heard of this. It's a clock that represents the countdown to the possibility of global catastrophe. And it's been maintained since 1947 by members of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And they adjust the clock every few years based on world events. The clock was at its highest level of 2 minutes to midnight back in the 50s, when the hydrogen bomb tests were being conducted by the Soviets and by the US. And since then, it's gone up and down based on various geopolitical events. But lately, the clock actually has been adjusted to take account of new threats, such as climate change. And here's where fusion power comes in. What's going to happen in the future? Well, it depends. If we can take those fusion bombs and decide to rid the world of nuclear weapons, that will bring the Doomsday Clock down. If we can generate power using fusion technology, we can also bring that Doomsday Clock down, because we'll be addressing climate change with this clean power. And if we can do that, this will be an example of us taking the sword of fusion weapons and beating into the plowshare of fusion power. And I think that would be a laudable goal for us all in the next few decades. Thank you very much.